Hi everyone, I'm meteorologist Craig Flint. Thanks for logging on to YourArea.com, another digital exclusive, and the Weather Academy. And, it was posed to me a couple days ago, Craig, what is up with all the wind? Well, when you get into the transitional months, that's usually when we have the most consecutive windy days. So those transitional periods between winter and then spring into summer, and then as you go summer into fall, fall into winter, that is when we typically see the magnitude of wind increase, and a lot of that has to do with the jet stream. And if you've watched for a while, you remember me saying the jet stream, so important because it drives weather here at the surface. So the question is, why does the wind blow? Well, it has the basic concept here is the way it works in the atmosphere is wind is blowing from high to low pressure. So how do we visualize that? Well, you have your favorite soda, right? Coca-Cola, Sprite, Dr. Pepper, whatever. Got the bottle of soda, and when you open it, you get that psst, that kind of fizz. Well, that is the easiest way to kind of visualize this because the air inside the bottle of soda is much higher than the ambient air that surrounds the bottle. So once you break that cap, you get that fizzy sound, and that is the air escaping from high to low pressure. So it's the same kind of idea in the atmosphere. Air is always flowing from high to low, the path of least resistance, that is. But did you know there's a couple of different types of wind that we look at? One is called the synoptic wind, and the other one is known as the mesoscale wind. Now, I know these are fancy terms, but basically the takeaway here for synoptic, you've heard us say that word before. Synoptic is kind of an equal opportunity ordeal. That means everyone gets something. In this case, we're talking about the wind. So you have the synoptic wind, and then obviously mesoscale wind is a little bit more localized. But we'll focus on the synoptic wind here. So what is a synoptic wind? Well, we already know that it's more of a widespread thing. Everyone feels the synoptic wind. So the synoptic wind is wind that is driven by weather systems that pass through, and again, typically more of a widespread wind event as opposed to the mesoscale wind. So anytime you have low pressure going over top or a cold front coming through, you usually get some wind associated with that, and obviously the stronger the system, the stronger the wind. So that's the synoptic wind. We went over mesoscale wind, which is wind produced by thunderstorms in the summer or snow squalls, which we're accustomed to here in the winter. These winds typically more localized. They don't affect as widespread of an area. It's right around individual storms or right with snow squalls as they come through. So synoptic wind, everyone gets it. Mesoscale wind is a little bit more localized. So why does this occur? Well, let's take a look at a summer setup here. So in the summertime, there's really no huge temperature disparity. In other words, it's pretty warm everywhere in the lower 48. So storm systems in the summer are typically not as strong as they are in the fall, in the winter, or in the spring going into the summer months. So you don't have much of a temperature gradient. There's not as much baroclinicity, which is another fancy term. So in the summertime, because there are no huge temperature differences, the storms are not that strong. Now, you'll still get a little wind with them as they move through, but certainly not to the magnitude of what we would see in the winter. So during the summer, no huge temperature differences, no temperature discontinuity. However, in the winter, that becomes accentuated. And that's when you have these temperature differences, the battle between colder air and warmer air, that's where you get these areas of low pressure to spawn. And typically when you have a temperature contrast like that, these storms can become very powerful. Low pressure deepens. So as the storm deepens, it becomes stronger. Now, the way you want to think of low pressure in the atmosphere is think of the atmosphere as a weighty air mass that's over top of you, okay? With low pressure, you're lifting the air, so you're losing weight at the surface. But the atmosphere is always trying to overcompensate for that. It wants to be in a state of equilibrium. So when you take the weight off the surface, high pressure has to come in and fill that void where the air is rising. And usually when you get a big temperature disparity like this, that's when these storms could really strengthen. Other things that we're talking about today include the local effects on wind. Obviously, Lake Erie is one of them. Think of Lake Erie as a frictionless surface. There's nothing to slow that wind down as it blows across the water. So typically right on the shoreline, you're always going to have a breeze that's a little bit more notable as compared to, say, areas that are inland. The wind over land tends to be a little slower because it encounters friction. Friction being trees, hills, buildings, stuff like that. It slows the wind speed down, but over the lake, there's nothing to slow that wind down, so that's why it could really ramp up over the open water of Lake Erie. You drop inland and it's a little bit slower, and that is typically why it's always just a touch windier right near the Lake Erie shoreline. The other thing that we have to take into effect is something that we call atmospheric mixing. So what atmospheric mixing is, this is just a kind of a snapshot of, say, 7 o'clock in the morning. And yeah, there's a little bit of a wind. It's not, anything that's too notable unless there's a storm system nearby. But if this were a typical clear summer sunny day, the wind in the morning really not that notable, just enough of a drift to the air. But as we go into the afternoon, the sun comes up and that heats the surface. So those air particles begin to rise, okay? Well, they can't just keep rising. Remember how I said the atmosphere is trying to overcompensate? So as this air is rising, it gets to a point where eventually it has to sink, all right? And what happens is as that air sinks, it can grab some of the wind that's above your head. So there it is at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Again, it's not anything that's crazy, right? Just a gentle breeze. But as the air rises, there's a corridor of winds at about 5,000 feet that are stronger. They're moving faster, right? So as this air rises up into that corridor of faster winds and then sinks, it can actually grab some of that wind that's up there and bring it down to the surface. We call it downward momentum transfer. And this happens when the sun's out because the sun's mixing the air up. So you get that rising motion, it taps into the wind that's aloft, and then it comes back down, and that's why it gets a little breezy on a summer afternoon, because of the sun mixing things up in the atmosphere. And then by 9 o'clock, when the sun goes down, everything kind of mellows out. It equals out, and we just kind of go back to a gentle breeze. So the sun is an important part of the forecast, especially when it comes to talking about wind. Now, we've had our fair share of windy weather recently because the jet stream has been a little bit more active, and we've had stronger storm systems that have been rippling along the jet stream to cause that synoptic wind, that wind that everyone feels. Now, with time, what's going to happen is the jet stream, say as we get into June, will lift back to the north, so that means we'll be farther away from the jet stream, so you will see the magnitude of windy days start to slow down as we get deeper into the summer until the sun comes up, right? And then you get that atmospheric mixing, which could cause breezy weather into the afternoon. So that's the deal with the wind. High to low pressure, the atmosphere is always trying to compensate for that. So as air rises, it sinks and tries to fill in the air that has been lifted, and that's what creates the wind. And that is this week's Weather Academy. Thanks for joining us here on YourErie.com. We'll be back next week with a brand new topic. We'll see you then.